Has anyone known a killer before they killed? What were they like? My little sister dated a guy when she was in high school who ended up murdering a couple he owed money to for heroin. This dude beat them with a fucking baseball bat and hammer. He almost got the death sentence, but ended up with life in prison with no possibility of parole. He was a seemingly nice, polite teenager. I used to drive him and my sister around for various dates and things. He was quiet, but not oddly so. He just seemed like a normal teenage boy. Not me, but my brother knew a kid who murdered both his grandparents with a baseball bat. He said that the kid always had some issues. Every graduating class has that kid, and I guess he was it. But apparently he was still a cool person to hang out with or something. Anyways, I feel bad for the kids since apparently he killed them due to schizophrenia. He woke up in his car covered in blood and called the cops. He had no idea what was going on. A few years ago I hired a father-son handyman team to help me get my house ready to put on the market. Among other things, my outside doorknobs were in bad shape, so they installed new ones. The dads seemed pretty nice, even did a little bit for free. On their third and last day at my house, he was pretty fired up about a big job they were starting the next day. 3 days later he killed his new clients because they were unhappy with his work. A neighbor saw what happened and ran into her house and hid. He kicked her door in and shot her too. I was terrified until he was caught. I worked with a guy that murdered his GF. He was a cool dude. I sat with him a lot on my lunch breaks. We talked about football, school, life, etc. Pretty normal stuff. Never would think he was a killer. He was not an aggressive person at all. I went to high school with a girl who poisoned her father. No one knew until she confessed a year later watching a Shakespeare play in college. She was a little weird in school, but I didn't think she was capable of that. Yes, was hired at the same time as him. Worked right next to him for several years. He was one of those stoner guys always bragging about the parties he went to. He was a little obnoxious in a bro sort of way, so I always skipped hanging out with him after work. After I left that job a little while later, he killed his ex-girlfriend while her 5-year-old was in the act watching TV, took the kid on a road trip to Texas, and smothered her on Christmas morning and left her in a suitcase on the side of the road. Boy, a couple years my minor in high school, he was always the outcast in his classes. He dressed funny, talked funny, and said disturbing things that some recall as threats, mostly to the girls of the school. After graduation, he ended up butchering a homeless woman he was, I can't say living together or in a relationship with. I am not sure what their status was either way. Kitchen knife. Drained her into the tub in court. He showed no remorse and was proud to have finally ended someone's life. His father was my professor in university. He took it very hard. I spent 3 months on a study abroad with a Special Forces, ex-FBI, guy named Joe. We were a small group of mostly students, whereas Joe was older and there as part of foreign immersion training for the military. He was a little awkward at times and didn't share too much about himself, which we mostly attributed to the age difference. I described Joe as very intense but kind-hearted. The military was very important to him and he always seemed very focused on that. But occasionally he'd make a dry joke or let his guard down for a moment with the group. He was very into photography and shared lots of great photos from the trip. He was also somewhat the protector of the group and we always felt completely safe with him. One story I'll share was when he was walking over a bridge and spied some guys in the trees waiting to jump down and rob him. He pulled out a large knife he carried on him and casually brandished it as he walked by. The guys smartly decided not to mess with Joe, but after he crossed, he saw them sprint across the bridge and hide behind a building. 2 policemen showed up shortly after and Joe showed them where the guys were hiding so the police could arrest them. Anyways, a few years after we got back, I heard the news that he had killed someone and took his own life. He had been training for a new position and his commander deemed that he wasn't physically fit enough for the job. The judgment effectively ended his career and he felt he had been unfairly judged. He brought a gun into the base and shot his commander dead, then killed himself. One of my parents' friends used to come around all the time. He was probably only 21. Nicest guy ever. Type of guy who wouldn't hurt a fly. A couple of years later he moved and we seen him on the news for murder. Turned out he got on the ice and his girlfriend convinced him to kill her ex with her. They then buried him in concrete. Only reason they got caught was because they wrote their fucking names in the concrete. I played basketball with a guy a few years ago in high school. Tried to find him on Facebook and turns out he was being tried for murder. Apparently he and some of his friends were looking for pot money, so they broke into this guy's house and somehow the guy ended up dead. Everyone in his group said he pulled the trigger, but he denied it. Maybe he did it, maybe he didn't, but I can say that he was a genuinely nice person when I knew him. Never would have expected him to kill someone, but I guess my mom was right about hanging out with the wrong crowd. Kid was in my dad's weed low trap and hung out with my brother. Really arrogant and mouthy. Biggest thing he did in junior high was when he was in 7th grade. He dismantled the toilets in one of our school's upstairs bathrooms. A couple of years later, his mom passed, and he found her, started to get in trouble, theft, then fighting. A few years later, he raped a girl, went to jail. After he was released, he wound up killing 7 people. I dated a guy who later stabbed his mother to death. He was psychotic and abusive, and I fled the state because I was afraid he was going to kill me. I found out years later that he murdered his mother just a few months after I left him. He's still in prison. It's been 20 years and I still have nightmares about him, and I still feel a little sick talking about it. One of my best friends when I was stationed at Fort Bragg ended up getting into some sort of drunken altercation later on in his career at Fort Hood. Went back to his house to retrieve a pistol. Went back to the party and shot a dude. It was absolutely insane to me when I heard about it because he had never shown any tendencies towards violence when I hung out with him pretty much every day for over 2 years. Probably drank a little too much, but he was always just a good dude raising a good family. Last time I talked to him was 3 days before his trial. He ended up changing his plea to guilty to receive 25 years instead of life. He's at Leavenworth now, going on probably 7 or 8 years now. Feel bad for the family of the guy he shot. He was a medically retired vet and didn't deserve to be gunned down like that. As much as the murderer was my friend, he gets to go home one day. The guy he shot never will. My neighbor's father murdered his entire family and then killed himself shortly before he was to be indicted over a Ponzi-esque scheme. I knew the whole family well. The dad was always a little weird and would do things like wear a full 3-piece suit to a child's soccer game. Never showed any signs of being violent though. The mother and 2 daughters were wonderful people. It was a real tragedy. My sister was killed by her fiancé. He was, well, normal. Took good care of her during recovery from surgery. A bit weird, but nothing stands out. Weird as in opposite interests and shy, where my sister was outgoing. Never would have expected it from him, until O had to clean out their place and found a bunch of guns and crap load of knives and shit. He was seemingly a really nice dude. He worked in our college dining hall, always friendly, polite, kind to the students, and he made me smile or chuckle more than once. It turns out he stabbed a homeless woman over 24 times and was arrested for murder. I suppose some people can just snap or are really good at hiding true nature. Not sure which category he falls into. My manager at work was a pretty chill, nerdy guy. He was really nice to talk to and a fun boss. Then he smothered his infant son and it kind of messed me up for a while. This was a guy that I almost considered a friend. Everyone at work was shocked and didn't know how to handle or feel about it. Of course, we talked about it when there weren't any customers around, but most of it was the expected "I can't believe, manager, did this talk." I graduated high school with Dr. Death, Chris Dunge. He was an asshole. He was charming with teachers and people who could benefit him. He was awful to everybody else. I didn't see it, but one or more awkward and vulnerable classmates said he bullied him relentlessly, and I believe it. He was easily irritated, and if you got on his nerves he would really lose his cool. Remarkably mean. And people would just shrug their shoulders and say that's just how Chris is. One of my childhood friends had a creepy little brother. She told me he killed some kittens in their driveway with a basketball, and that one night he woke her up by standing over her bed with a lighter, watching her. He was only like 6 or 7 years old. Couple years later I find out from her that he's been institutionalized until he's 18. She told me she was really worried for herself and her parents the day he gets out, which now that I think about it, may have happened already or it's coming soon. Edit. As for how I remember him, he wasn't like my little brothers, as in he didn't get excited about games or toys and he never smiled. There was this kid that would sit next to me in chemistry during my sophomore year of HS. Some days he'd be totally out of it with his head down. Other days he'd be answering every question in class. On the worse end he'd sometimes get up and run out of the classroom. Our TA would then spend most of the period trying to find him. His life was definitely shit by the looks of it. Fast forward a year later, it turned out he got hired by some kid outside of school as a hitman. Kid wanted his parents dead. He brought a hammer to the kid's house, injuring his mom, but he got fought off by the kid's dad. He ran off but got caught at a nearby gas station. He got a 16-year sentence about 2 weeks ago. My best friend's older brother killed her stepmom, strangled her and burned the house down. He was just like any other teenage older brother, a bit rebellious but nothing out of the ordinary. He was kinda goth and liked heavy metal and had dark humor. He played Goldeny with us and always let me use the see-through purple controller. He teased his little sister just like any brother would. One time he took us for a car ride and did donuts in a church parking lot while blasting a big Shiny Tunes album, and it was really fun. Nothing ever indicated what he would do later in life. In my first semester of college, I had a computer science professor I really loved. Near the end of the semester, he told us he may be taking time off and finding a replacement for the semester. His severely autistic son had died in a tragic pool accident. He noted that the media was trying to make him look bad. I created a GoFundMe for funeral expenses. He appreciated it and shared photos to use on the page. Fast forward half a year, I get calls from news reporters asking what my thoughts are. He had been arrested on suspected unintentional manslaughter. It turns out, he had left his son outside in the cold by the pool, unsupervised. When he left for work, his son was never supposed to be unattended. His son was outside for who knows how long before the professor's daughter found the boy face down in the pool. Further research into the case revealed the boy was living in an unfurnished basement, feces all over the walls, often left alone. The police were at the home frequently. CPS had made various safety requirements for them that they never followed. He's being charged with unintentional manslaughter and various forms of child abuse. Him and his wife are being charged for filling the boy's Ritalin prescription for many months after the death. I still believe it was intentional. Texts revealed the daughter discovered the boy when the professor texted her, asking her to check if Freak was okay. My family bought a house from a man who flipped houses for a living back when I was growing up. He was a nice man, married with grown kids. He would often come over for dinner and help with minor repairs around the house. We moved away a few years later and he wanted to buy the house back. Luckily, it was a cash deal because soon after it all went through, he was arrested for child porn. When the cops raided his house, there was no sign of his wife. Upon looking into it, no one had seen or heard from her in months. Turns out, he had murdered her and buried her in their backyard. I sat next to that man at the dinner table as a child. Still haunts me.